Kahani Bar brings you a cocktail of stories in English and in Hindustani. I am Richa, and today's story is from Fauji Heart, a collection of human stories with the backdrop of Indian Army. Written for you by Neerja K, these stories will sometimes bring a smile and sometimes a tear, but they will always allow you to peek into the lives of the human beings who are often hidden behind that stiff uniform.
Story for the day is, and then he jumped off the cliff. Lieutenant Vikram was awakened by the soft sound of his tiptoeing Sahayak, Bhim Bahadur. He knew he had come bearing his morning cup of tea. Hopefully, it was safely encased in a thermos flask, or else he would be enjoying a tea popsicle instead. He burrowed further into his sleeping bag and shut his eyes tighter. He had no desire to wake up to yet another boring day in the hostile territory of Bumla. It was at a height of 16,000 feet above sea level. Suddenly, his mind conjured up a scary vision that seemed very real to him, despite his closed eyes. It was his company commander's face in the throes of a fit of anger, complete with bulging, bloodshot eyes and an equally threatening moustache. The angry and animated face kept getting bigger and the eyes increasingly turned redder. The moustache trembled through a shower of spit. It felt all too real and forced the young lieutenant to finally emerge from the cocoon of his sleeping bag. As he reluctantly wormed his head out from under the warm sleeping bag, he saw that Bhim Bahadur had poured tea into a mug and kept it on top of a wooden tea chest that was precariously balanced on the uneven floor of his snow tent. This was his makeshift bedside table that was propped up by a variety of stones to maintain some kind of even meal. The table's balancing act was nothing compared to the delicate positioning of his wooden cot, which was actually inclined to one side. On his first night in the tent, he had been unable to decide which end of the cot he should rest his head on. Every time he had settled in his sleeping bag, he had felt that his body would just slither down the slope of the bed. The only question that remained was whether he would prefer to fall on his head or go down feet first. He had finally elected to rest his feet on the sloping side. At least this way he would have a safe landing in case gravity got the better of him in the night. The first thing he had done the following morning was to yell at his Sahayak for not having checked the legs of the bed. The Sahayak had reluctantly muttered, "Sorry, Saab, but the bed is perfectly fine." Vikram had yelled back, "You think I'm lying? I kept sliding down the bed all night. It's my first day here and I have a terrible headache thanks to this crooked bed of yours. I couldn't sleep at all and you are telling me that the bed is fine?" "Saab, actually, it is the tent that is pitched on a slope. This is the best level ground we could find to pitch it," the Sahayak had replied very sheepishly. Vikram realized his mistake and softened a little. "Okay, I understand. At least use some bricks." "But wait, what am I talking about? There are no bricks here." "Okay, put some wooden planks and level my bed, please, so that I can sleep tonight." "Yes, Saab." The Sahayak had saluted smartly and gone off in search of some discarded wooden tea chests that he could strip to provide the lumber needed for his officer's new project. Despite several attempts at leveling the bed, it had remained partially inclined. But with the passage of time, Lieutenant Vikram's body had become accustomed to the odd sensation of sleeping that way. Vikram unzipped 3 inches of his sleeping bag, sneaked the mug in and zipped it back up again. he started to sip the warm tea. Bhim Bahadur gazed in the direction of the loud sips that resonated from the lumpy sleeping bag. He wondered, like he did every morning, how could anyone possibly sip his tea hidden away inside a sleeping bag lying in that position? He was sure that one day Saab would spill the tea and suffer burns on his face. But he was not in a position to judge or comment. He had already prepared the hot water for Sahab's bath, which he was sure would be used only for a dry wash. He laid out his uniform now and retreated from the tent as quietly as he had entered. Vikram had been grumpy for the last few months, and Bhim Bahadur was worried for him. A posting in Bumla had done no good to anyone. As Vikram savoured the last few sips of his tea, he recalled the day the entire brigade had been given orders to move up from Tawang and spread out to the various pickets overlooking Wangtung. In retrospect, his life in Tawang seemed divine compared to Bumla. Tawang was tough too, but at least there was habitation around. Unlike Bumla, there were other colours there besides just the whites of the snow and the olive green of their own uniforms. Then of course there was the Tawang market, which they could visit once in a while. He fondly remembered the young girl who ran a shop of assorted imported items. Vikram and his friends used to go there often, more to look at her lovely smile than to buy anything. They had named her MT, Miss Tawang, but here no such luck. The only chance encounters here were with rugged rhododendron shoots peeping bravely through the snow here and there. Vikram was city-bred. A posting to Tawang was itself a punishment to him. He had first boarded a train to Guwahati, then boarded another one to Misamari, where a 1-ton truck was waiting for him and another officer who was returning from his annual leave. By the time their 1-ton reached the foothills of Arunachal Pradesh, he was already homesick. He visualized on a mental map of India how far away from home he was. Lost in these thoughts, Vikram had started to hum the melancholy country number. I am 500 miles away from home. Away from home, away from home, away from home, away from home. Lord, I'm 500 miles away from home. He remembered how the drive had started getting rougher and the roads had become narrower as they had gained height. In the 1-ton, the discomfort was magnified tenfold. Vikram missed the comfort of his father's newly acquired Maruti. He struggled to keep awake. He was sure that at any moment, the 1-ton would skid and plunge into the deep ravines that bordered the road. When that happened, he wanted to be fully awake to jump out of the vehicle in time. They had spent the night at a transit camp just short of the famous Rupa and Tanga valleys. An hour into the journey, the next morning, the terrain had become impossibly difficult. The previous day's ride had suddenly seemed like a walk in the park. All he had been able to register were treacherous roads, deep gorges, and countless gushing chus, the mountain rivers, as they had wound their way slowly around mountain after mountain. The change in ear pressure had played havoc with his head as they had repeatedly ascended and descended steep mountains. By the time they had reached Sella Pass, he had felt a little better and started to notice the change in the landscape. It was freezing despite the bright sunshine and a clear deep blue sky. The snowy slopes shimmered in the bright sunlight as if the hands of nature had sprinkled gold dust on them. A strange sight en route had been of the endless number of bare tree stumps as far as his eyes could see. This was a reminder of the 1962 war, he learnt later from the driver. The Chinese troops had ventured this far into Indian territory, and before retreating, in sheer madness, they had felled all those trees. The girth of each of those stumps bore witness to how old and beautiful those pines must have been. When the road had finally meandered into Tawang, the vista that had greeted him had not been as bad as he had imagined through the journey. After all, Tawang was beautiful, mesmerizing and serene. But, as luck would have it, before long he and the entire brigade were split up and sent further ahead to the border pickets. Vikram remembered the constant digging and shoveling that was required to keep the mule tracks clear all the way up to PTSO, where the mule tracks ended. The real drudgery started from there on. You had to create your own track, and that too the right one. He had been living in this isolated post far away from all civilization for 9 months now. For a full 9 months, he had not set eyes on a female form. It had been nearly a year since he had last met his sweetheart, whom he had left behind in his hometown. 9 months seemed an eternity to him. It was long enough for a mother to bring to life a baby. The isolation had turned him inside out. It was like serving a lifetime in solitary confinement. Actually, they were not even supposed to be here at this post. Wangdong was a grazing ground on the banks of the river Samdorong, in a remote area of Arunachal Pradesh, close to the infamous Namkachu of 1962. This was a grey area as far as ownership was concerned. Any patrolling would be provocative and an open invitation for action from the Chinese. So no patrolling was conducted as a matter of policy. However, in the summer months, civilians were allowed to graze their cattle in that area. The Chinese did the same in other similar areas. Earlier that year, there had been reports of Chinese incursions in the Samdorong Chu Valley, and the whole brigades had to be mobilized. This is how Vikram's company had landed up in Bumla. As part of the massive operation, they were all scattered in various pickets and posts, dotting the ridge that overlooked the Samdorong Valley. They were separated from each other by miles upon miles and layers upon layers of hostile mountains, reachable only on foot. Their CEO was probably at this very moment doing exactly that, scaling the rugged mountains on foot. He would trek to reach each of the companies in rotation. Poor chap. Vikram often pitied and admired him for the way he went on with his daily march. Vikram drew some solace from his CO's plight. At least the lieutenant was better off than the colonel. The only others who walked more than the CO in these parts were the pack mules who ferried all the essentials to the outposts, often trudging with a heavy burden for days. On second thoughts, the CO walked the most. You see, the mules walked from point A to B and back to A, whereas the colonel walked from point A to B, B to C, and C to D, and so on and so forth. He wondered whom he should pity more. It had to be the CO. The poor man was based in the battalion headquarters but was always on the move, visiting his 4 companies mostly on foot. He was sure that the old man's kneecaps would be on the verge of giving way He wondered why he was suddenly feeling sympathy for the man who had made him so miserable. He had denied him his right, the right to his annual leave. At this time, he should be feeling nothing but contempt and anger for the master villain who had got his leave cancelled. But he was not the only villain in this tragic saga that was Lieutenant Vikram's life. Pulmonary edema was a constant threat at this altitude due to the lack of oxygen. The long winter brought along further misery. Although it was the end of April, the snow was still hip deep. You had to be there to know what it took to live in such wilderness, away from family, friends, and your love. With poor communication systems, the only lifeline was the letters, and those were too few and far between. There was nothing in the name of entertainment or recreation. All he had were the books he had brought along, and he was now down to his last one, QB7 by Leon Uris. What in the name of heaven was he going to do after he finished it? Maybe he should learn how to play the guitar from one of the soldiers? His regiment recruited from the entire Seven Sisters of the northeastern states of the country. Music was in their blood. Almost all of them could sing or play some instrument or the other, guitar being the most popular. Yes, that was it. He had decided. That was what he was going to do, learn the guitar. But even this decision did not help lift his mood in any way. He felt miserable, and more so because he had chosen this life for himself. Make no mistake, he was very proud to be in the army. It's just that he was not equipped to deal with all the loneliness. How does Vikram deal with his loneliness? Will he find a way to cope with his challenging posting? Will he pick up the guitar or finally get his much awaited annual leave? Stay tuned for the next episode to uncover the answers.
This is Richa signing off. Take good care of yourselves till I'm back with the next story.